What is one particular ingredient that you thought was necessary in terms of seeing that day, seeing Habré prosecuted, and what is one lesson that you think is applicable outside of the Habré context for those people who are interested in bringing other high-level political perpetrators to account?
I think unquestionably it's the role of the victims who were the central protagonists in this effort, both in the campaign and in the trial. I think that what the trial showed is that with perseverance and tenacity, a group of dedicated survivors can actually create the political conditions to bring their former dictator to justice. And the role of the victims was central. It was central in getting the trial. It was only the pleas, the campaigning of the victims that convinced public opinion, that convinced political leaders to allow this trial to happen. And then the trial itself, the voice of the victims, I mean, of course you have the French system in which you have civil parties, so the victims were there represented by their lawyers. And the contours of the trial itself were imposed by the victims. This wasn't a case, as we've seen so many times, where a distant prosecutor narrowly focuses the charges in order to avoid political opposition or secure an easy conviction. This was a case, the victims from the beginning said, we want justice for the Hajarais, for the Zahawas, for the Muslims, for the Christians, for the political prisoners. Women came forward. Rape victims came forward because they were part of the process, because they were part of the Victims Association, because they had trust in their lawyers and in the campaign that they were a part of, in order to come forward and tell, the most significant and delicate of details.
A lot of people have been talking about the Habré Tribunal or the Extraordinary African Chambers as a model to replicate elsewhere. I think you've made quite clear that in terms of the centrality of victims to the trial, it should be something that's replicated. But it's also had some shortcomings. Hissène Habré famously didn't participate in his own trial, not even speaking a word during the proceedings. Other individuals from the Habré regime who were initially intended to be held to account were not held to account for their alleged crimes. And victims, while they received trial justice, still have not received any reparations that were supposed to be part of the Extraordinary African Chambers. So do you think, given all that, it is a good model to replicate, or is it just certain elements of it that are important to replicate? How should we see its legacy?
I think what the institution showed is that you can tailor-make a court, in effect, to respond to the circumstances. I mean, the victims for 15 years were seeking to have Habré prosecuted before the ordinary Senegalese courts. It was only this bizarre decision by the ECOWAS Court of Justice that imposed an ad hoc tribunal. But in fact, that ad hoc tribunal was designed by the African Union in a way that was, purpose-built for this trial. So, for instance, Senegalese courts are not televised. The statute said they'll be televised. Senegal happens to have, the core crimes within its penal code. The statute did as well. Under Senegalese law, there is no command responsibility. The statute put command responsibility. So it was, I think what this showed is, once you have jurisdiction, you can create an African Union court, you can create a multilateral court, you can create an ECOWAS court. So I think it shows that there's one more weapon in the arsenal of international justice. Obviously, the fact that there's no reparations is I mean, it's something that I feel every day because these are my friends, these are people I've worked with who not only deserve money for what happened to them, but also deserve money for having done what they did. I mean, this tribunal only cost the international community $10 million because the victims did all the work for 15 years. And I feel terrible that at the end of the day, there's been some recovery, but it's been very small. And the victims actually hold two judgments, one before the Extraordinary African Chambers of, I think, $125 million, and one in Chad of the same amount. And yet they haven't seen a penny of that.
Since the end of the Habré trial, you've shifted your focus to the Gambia and to hopefully bringing to account former President Yahya Jammeh, whose own experiences, especially since he left the country, mirror some of those that we see with Hissène Habré. Where did those efforts to hold Jammeh and some of his officials and senior figures in his regime, where do those efforts stand?
Well, what's important here is first to see how the Habré, when the Habré case began, because Chadians came to us and said they were watching the Pinochet case, and they said, we want to do that. And just as the Habré case was ending, Yahya Jammeh fell. And the Gambians came to us and said, we want to do that. And that's another benefit of having victims in the driver's seat, is that it's replicable. You don't have to wait for an international institution. It's something that you can pass forward. Now, obviously, every situation is different. I mean, in the Gambia, in the case of Yahya Jammeh, first of all, he's in a country, Equatorial Guinea, which is a dictatorship. On New Year's Eve, the two dictators, the host and the guest, were dancing together. So you can imagine already the difficulties that's going to pose in getting Yahya Jammeh extradited. And secondly, the Gambia is still in a delicate moment of transition. And everybody, the victims included, feel that it would not be responsible today to try to bring Yahya Jammeh back into this cauldron. That the political conditions, the security conditions, the institutional conditions don't yet exist for Jammeh to come back. And the Gambian government has embarked on a truth commission process that continues to impress me every day. It has been set up after a very interactive national consultation. It is now every day, it's like a soap opera on TV as people watch. And I mean, I watch it and I watch it on social media, and the revelations that are coming out, first, it's going chronologically. So first from the year of the coup, 1994. And it is both building the case, the record for a prosecution, and creating additional political will so that down the road, we can imagine that the government will seek to bring Yahya Jammeh back. Now, in the meantime, what we've looked at is that the worst massacre that took place in the Gambia under Yahya Jammeh was actually a massacre of foreigners. 50 West Africans, including 44 Ghanaians, who were trying to get to Europe, were mistaken for mercenaries, arrested, and all killed, except for one. We looked into that massacre and determined, after speaking with many of Jammeh's former henchmen, that these migrants were killed by a death squad that reported to Yahya Jammeh, the junglers. And we located the sole survivor, who's here in Ghana, and together with him and the families of the victims that he rounded up, we went to see President Akufo-Addo of Ghana to present these findings. And he was concerned. He said, look, 44 of my citizens were killed. He happened to have been foreign minister at the time. This is not something that I can look away from. And he has tasked the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Foreign Affairs with examining the political and diplomatic and juridical implications of moving forward. And we're waiting for that determination now.
Reed, you've become something of a human radar as to where we should look for potential breakthroughs on justice and accountability. Habré, hopefully Jammeh and the Gambia here in Ghana as well. Where else are you looking? Where else should we be looking for some of these breakthroughs?
You know, it's not up to me. It's from the outside to make to make these determinations. I think where the crimes have been committed and where victims are determined to move forward. I mean, when we brought actually Habré's victims to meet with Jammeh's victims. That's how this campaign began. And they explained all the difficulties and obstacles they overcame. It was clear in that meeting that there was a determined group of Gambian victims who are ready to meet those obstacles and do what it takes. And I think it's going to be up to the people of each country and the victims and activists in each country to determine who is the next Hissène Habré or Pinochet or Jammeh or Rios Montt or what have you.
Reed Brody, thank you for your time. Thanks for being with us here at Justice Talks at the Wayamo Foundation and with the Africa Group for Justice and Accountability.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Reed.